And we are recording and we are on YouTube. How's everybody doing on YouTube today? I haven't been on in a while. I thought I would come on and discuss with you a few things. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Toni Morrison's book called Mercy. She was describing in her book about how there were various different slaves. And she mentioned that there were rich slaves. And I kind of found it kind of unusual to even acknowledge that a slave could be rich. Because why wouldn't they take the notion to buy their freedom? What was that all about? And she talked about the various different slaves that were actually that were actually Irish descent and some African American. So I don't know. I got the impression that uh, the indentured servant could possibly be what she was referencing to with the rich slave, but I think that sometimes when we are writing books, we develop categories of our own and that we only understand. And I have been thinking about getting back to my writing, and I wanted to kind of talk it out and put it on audio tape. Um, I was very, very invigorated and excited about putting my book out there and found that I needed it formatted. So I spent some time going back over it, retyping it, and it's taken me such a long time to physically type out that book with the charts on it, which has caused me a little difficulty because there's charts that I don't have, the ability to lay out the Excel. But I did want to talk out the book, and I wanted to talk out the book a little bit, and basically I thought maybe I should go audio first opposed to just going formatted and written. And right now, the main book that keeps coming to my mind is The Journey of the Class Agent, according to Garth. Now, I took that and put it in the form of poetry initially, but now I discovered that I want to write out the whole story in the form of a novel. And the scene and the setting of it is rather unusual. It's me going on a journey. And as I go on this journey, I talk about what happened and how I receive a visitation from a soldier that was one of the first female soldiers. And she spoke into my life and according to my situation and literally helped me through. And for some reason, this particular picture was put into my present, and I kept reflecting back on the picture of the soldier, Kathy, and what she had gone through and being one of the first military soldiers. And I don't liken myself into being a military soldier, but I only say that because I was overseas on a journey, and this became more of a journey than what I anticipated. So on this journey, as I walk out the story, and the scene takes place at the airport with the family splitting up, taking two separate planes, and vowing that they would meet up once we both got to the next continent, Germany. So in this story, there was a lot of hustle and bustle because I was supposed to be assigned a chaperone, someone that would actually help me interpret the language, learn how to count the money, and also look at the various different hotels and help me to be suited with an appropriate hotel so that I wouldn't get cheated out of my money. So the chaperone met us at the airport. She was very nice about talking about lending her services to help us, and whenever we needed her, she exchanged phone numbers and said, once you get settled in the hotel, give me a call. I'll come over and I will chauffeur you around. That particular time, when I first came to the country of Germany, I had this very eerie feeling when we went to the building that I was supposed to be working in. And it was just this cold, cold feeling about something wasn't right. And I couldn't put my finger on it. But all I knew is that something wasn't right. And I kept reflecting back on that very moment when we first reached the property where I was supposed to work at. Everything else appeared to be fine prior to that. It wasn't until I got to this property where I was going into the office. Now, this story takes place over in Germany, but at the same time, there was a need to reflect back on the actual end part of the story and then reflect back on various different scenes and sort of going backwards in the story. So maybe I'll take you from the backwards story. As we take the story from the backwards scene, it appeared that there was a case going on, a hearing, an investigation. And you know how EEOC is when they investigate. It's a long, long process. And it took over 5 years for this investigation. Over 5 years that I did not think that I could possibly live through. But somehow I gained the strength to live through this 5-year investigation. I did not know that this particular angel was supporting me and carrying me through this whole thing. But nevertheless, there was some support from this particular angel that supported me. And one would have thought that I would have perished or I never would have made it through. And given the fact that it detailed having money to pay for cases, to pay for lawyers to represent you, the whole bit. But nevertheless, I never thought one time to reflect back on should I have done it or should I have just gone home and let things be. But because of my persistency in fighting the case, I was fortunate enough to have every one of the allocations overturned, every one of them, and proving that I was an innocent victim who had been targeted. And upon learning that everything that I made reference to fanned out, and even more, they found more discrimination than what they anticipated, and more people joined on the case. So nevertheless, I had prevailed. At that point, there was no admitting to any guilt or wrongdoing, but they wanted to settle because they knew that they had found discrimination throughout the department. Now, here's where the whole confusion comes in at. If you have successfully turned over all of the allocation and you have been vindicated, then at that point, there should be an offering of asking for forgiveness, indicating that they're sorry, or even a settlement for the damages, that punitive damages that may occurred to someone who was not guilty of charge, but in fact they were vindicated. Now, as we go into the story in the end, as I come to the end to tell you, I'm going to take a pause here because I have to regroup myself to get a clear understanding of where can I take you with the story and how far. Because I don't want to give the whole story away and not have you read it and be able to judge for yourself. So I'm just going to take a second gear here and change from that gear of the story. But I did want to say I admired Toni Morrison and her long journey with being a literary writer and one of the first literary recipients of her outstanding work. And I had more likened myself to Maya Angelou as a poet. And at one point, I tried very hard to write poetry, and it wouldn't come to me. It wasn't until I had a circumstance in my life that poetry came to me very easily. As a matter of fact, it was like storytelling and epics. And I have a recording that I'm about to put out of my storytelling epics, that I like to call them. I had the occasion of being able to travel and do storytelling with a very, very prominent storyteller who urged me to go on to continue my work in doing the poetry and the epic poetry, of course. And I have a recording that I'm going to be presenting, and the way that it was written was from the right side of my brain, where I literally wrote while in a trance. And I like to say that that is how I like to write, when I'm half asleep and half awake, because that way I can draw information from the right side of my brain. And it could be information that I never ever tapped into, but because I'm under this trance, I can pull from that right side of my brain. Now, in this collection, it's called, I do have the one finished called The License to Preach, and it goes into a lot of biblical history about Mary and her being a virgin, and the story of Jesus. And it gets into understanding that, don't we realize that in order for Mary to produce a man, she should have had an XX chromosome and had a male with a Y chromosome. And because she didn't have that setting, there was no male there, how could she produce a male child? So I go into all this in the poetry, and to make a long story short, I am expounding upon what I feel to be false in Christianity. And so many people have been afraid to tackle these things. And when you're doing poetry, you can use a play on words, and you can tackle such monumental topics such as the virgin birth of Jesus. So in this poetry, I go on to talk about various things that pertain to the church and biblical teachings. And that's why it's entitled License to Preach, because when you have this license, a lot of times we don't use this license well, where we could take this license and we can challenge topics under the auspices that we carry a license. Now, the book that I was telling you about, Words, the other one is titled Words That Cast a Spell. Now, I don't know if you realize that whenever you're using words, they are casting spell. Even the spelling of words are casting a spell, whether we know it or not. So in the book, I'm talking about words that are used cleverly that will create a change, and they have the capability of adjusting things. And these words are so powerful that they literally cast spells. And I want us to know that we've got to be careful with our words, especially if we're literary writers. Now, I'm going to cut this session short just to make sure that I am recording. I'll be back at you if this is going well. Thank you.